Welcome to today's webinar, Reducing Workforce Device Loss in the Enterprise. First, some notes. Everyone is on mute today. The presentation is being recorded, so a replay link and a copy of the slides will be emailed after the webinar. The webinar is hosted today by Brett Cooper and Patrick McGlynn. Brett is the founding partner of BlueFletch and also has been in the tech and mobility industry for over 20 years with companies like Coca-Cola and Accenture. Patrick is a well-known mobility expert and manager of systems engineering at BlueFletch. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll hand it over to Brett and Patrick.
Thank you for joining us today for another BlueFletch webinar. Today's topic will be specifically around reducing device loss for enterprise mobile devices. Today I'm joined by Patrick McGlynn, and we'll be talking through a couple different topics, tips and tricks. So Patrick, maybe to get us started, can you talk a little bit about what is device loss and where does it come from, and then why do you actually want to reduce it?
Sure, yeah. So we deal with many retailers who have thousands of deployed devices, and these devices are not only critical for business operations, but they're also very expensive. So companies want to keep those devices up and running, keep them where they're supposed to be, and keep them available for employees. So that goes into reducing how many devices get lost each quarter, each month, each year, and also making sure that they are readily available for employees to use during the day.
All right, so the cost of the device, which could be $1,000 to $2,000, and then there's also the availability. When you think about availability, what is the actual cost of that, or what's the impact of that on the business?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if there is not devices available for users, for employees to do their inventory counts, for their online picking orders, that is a huge cost of just that downtime. That tasks cannot be completed, money cannot be transacted with customers, orders cannot be fulfilled, customers might not be happy if their order's not ready when you get there. So it's not necessarily just about that device cost, as you mentioned. It's also about making sure employees have the tools they need to complete their tasks and keep that business up and running and operational.
Yeah. Are there security risks from devices getting lost?
There can be, if depending on how data is stored on devices, depending on how easily it is to access and connect to devices and pull data down, there can definitely be security risk if those devices are being used by bad actors, someone off-site that's looking to steal data, looking to copy network configurations, or take APKs, applications off of devices, and see how they're architected and security keys that might belong in there. So that's definitely another element of reducing device loss, is the security concept of making sure that those devices stay inside the four walls, ideally, and stay where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then where do devices actually go when they get lost? Like, what's the, we talk about device loss. Is somebody selling those, or what's actually happening to them?
Yeah, so I think when I first started learning about this problem, I jumped to the assumption that most people were actually stealing these devices because they can be worth, $1,000, $2,000. As I've talked with more and more, organizations and retailers over the years, they believe it's not actually a theft issue. It's more of just a misplacement issue of devices accidentally being left in someone's locker, stashed in a desk drawer, left on top of a high shelf when someone's doing their picking task. So devices definitely go missing, but it's not always for the nefarious reasons that you might assume of people stealing devices to resell on eBay, if you will.
What's the one we've seen that people putting devices that do buy online, picking, and then forgetting and putting a device into a bag or box?
Oh yeah, we've definitely seen retailers accidentally ship devices to customers, and people tend to find a device that they like, that works well for them, and they might intentionally stash that device for their use the next day or the next shift. So it's multifaceted. It could be accidental. It could be that a device might not be performing well, so someone rips out the battery and then we don't hear from it for days or weeks. Or it could be for intentional purposes that are not desired by the business. So,
and for devices that are stolen, where do those normally go?
Yeah, secondary markets, if someone's able to wipe them, they'll probably will try to put them on eBay. Somehow I get emails from these people looking to sell used, Zebra Honeywell devices. Not sure how I got onto that mailer, but definitely, there's some secondary market for these devices since they are such high cost devices. You can definitely recover some of that if you were to try to sell them. But a lot of tools available to help prevent that, which we'll get into here in just a little bit.
Got it. And then for, I guess, in generalization, like what percentage of devices get lost for companies? Do you have any metrics around that? I know I've heard some numbers, but do you have any thoughts around what is the actual range for most companies?
Yeah, it definitely differs. I think on average we hear somewhere around the 10 to 15% range year over year device loss, and which translates to how many devices they look to replace each year. So that is a big number at scale for sure. I think the math, Brett, that you've done for that is if you take 10% of the cost of a single device and extrapolate that over the number of devices in your fleet, that can give you a rough idea of really how much it's costing you to replace devices each year. And we work with some very large customers, very large retailers, and that number is pretty astronomical, honestly.
Yeah, so if you have $1,000 devices and 100 of them, and you lose 15%, you're losing. Let me do some quick math here. Be 150,000. Or is that no? That's wrong. 15,000. Yeah. So really, it's 15% of whatever you spent on your total top line device cost. If you spent 10 million on your fleet, you're losing 1.5 million a year.
Yep.
So that's definitely a big expense if you do have a lot of devices out there in the field. So I guess just to get us into the approaches, like the I guess areas of approaches, like what's the first area you think about when you think about reducing device loss?
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of different things we're going to discuss here, and I'd recommend it's really a multifaceted approach to reducing device loss. We'll talk about some software and some hardware methods to do that, but really, the first one for us is just building some accountability around device usage. So think of it like a library. When you go to a library and check out a book, you write your name down in a card and you check that out for the day. If a book goes missing, you can reference that card to see who the last person that might have had it was. We bring a similar concept to our enterprise launcher and require a user to actually check into the device, sign into the device to check it out, and to create that accountability and that chain of custody, so we understand who had the device last, and if that device doesn't show up, you can start working your way up the ladder and seeing, asking, John, you had the device last, do you remember where you put it? And not necessarily to get people in trouble, but it's just really the best way to track and see where devices might be. So that's where we start with that check-in, check-out process. I've seen a lot of companies do that with a variety of different methods over the years, really starting with just paper-based processes, having a manager in a cage that hands out devices and requires someone to write their name down as they check it out. That's kind of the basics of where companies start. We see people using credentials, their single sign-on credentials to check devices out. And that's the approach that we've sort of adopted here at BlueFletch with our enterprise launcher, is that if you check a device out, you might as well use that as your entry point to single sign-on with your secure credentials, authenticate against the identity provider, make sure you have access to even use the device, and then you can properly check that device out for building that accountability chain.
For check and check out, what do E&Ms offer, like the SODIs and AirWatches and Intunes? What do they have for capability-wise around check and check out?
Yeah, so they do have check-in, check-out systems through their own launchers. It's a bit of a different approach. Some MDMs require you to actually have a separate user database where users have their ID and password stored that might differ from your Okta or Azure Active Directory tools. Some can build in those integrations for you. So there's definitely different methods. Some of the OEMs even have their own check-in, check-out solutions, but again, you can end up with some fragmented user management with those different tools. So trying to keep that all unified as best as possible is the approach I would recommend, and hence why we we push that single sign-on as your check-in, check-out process as well. You might as well unify those two experiences.
What's your experience around locking cradles or locking cabinets, or even the cabinets being open and closed? Like, what do you see around that?
So yeah, I definitely see those in different facilities, and I think to varying levels of success around that. The locking, so there you have the locking cabinets, which each device might be hidden behind a little mini door. You scan your badge, enter a PIN, and that door will pop open for the device. Those seem to work pretty well because you can have your charging cradle built into there. Devices can't just be picked up off the cradle. However, I've definitely heard that sometimes the solution can be more expensive than the problem, and those locking cabinets are expensive. We've seen locking cradles as well start to be promoted in the marketplace. So that same concept, but just really isolated into just a single cradle versus a full cabinet. Again, a lot of feedback I've heard around that is, that might be too expensive, too heavy-handed of a solution for the actual problem. Those are some of the more hardware-based approaches to device accountability and check-in, check-out processes. I don't think there's anything wrong with those tools if you've got the budget for them and you really are concerned about those pieces of hardware. They're great tools for that, and we see those in other industries as well. I think law enforcement uses them for even some of their equipment as well that's much more sensitive or needs to be access controlled very diligently. So applying those same concepts is, it works in this case, but again, pretty high cost. So we usually start with the software approaches that we mentioned earlier with your check-in, check-out processes on the device as sort of the first step to improving your or reducing your device loss for them.
And for accountability, like how much, if when you have swag, like what is the amount of reduced loss you're going to get from having a good check-in, check-out or visibility into what's going on there?
So I think we've, in our studies, seen, we've reduced those loss percentages by about 50%, I think, in the first year of introducing just the software-based check-in, check-out tools. It's definitely a problem that probably will never get to zero. There's always going to be accidents or mistakes where devices go missing. But being able just to make one small change with software and, cut your costs in half is a pretty significant first step. I think with one case study we went from about 15% to 7% in the first year, and continuously driving that number down as processes get more mature and people understand, the importance of this process.
Can you talk about what are there any keys around that accountability process? Is it putting a dashboard up to say who has what device checked out? Is it having like reports go to your manager and people don't turn things in? Or are there certain things that work better than others from an accountability standpoint?
Yeah, I think definitely empowering the managers is the first thing to make someone be your champion in your chair at each local site to make sure those devices are wrangled and brought back in. So that's notifications if a device is removed improperly, providing tools for the manager to see where all his or her devices are, see when devices stop reporting, and trying to almost like the first 48, the sooner you figure out that a device might be missing, the quicker it is, the easier it is to actually find and locate that device. Getting that data in a timely manner via notifications, via emails, or some of the methods we do to try to make sure that those devices quickly get back into the available pool for users.
I think one of the other things too we've heard too, you mentioned this earlier, but around availability, devices that don't get put back on a cradle don't get charged, and the next shift that comes in tries to pick it up, it's got 10% left on his battery, it's useless to that shift. So I think that's another point, just value-wise.
Absolutely. I think that's almost as important as the device loss problem itself. Even if you have devices available, but there's no batteries, or another user is logged in and you can't, for some reason, break out of that user, that device is just as good as missing. So devices being back where they're supposed to be, ready for the next user and fully charged, is really kind of the core problem that might even supersede the actual device loss problem. So
one quick segue I had on that. We've seen this some places where people will pull batteries out and put devices into like a safe or a locking cabinet. What's the downside of doing that?
So, well, I think the reason people do that in the first place is those cradles, as we mentioned, can start to get expensive. And so people might just opt for just the battery bay. It's a little bit cheaper. So, yeah, as you mentioned, rip the battery out, put them in the bay, or buy a bunch of, USB-C chargers from Amazon instead of cradles, and just kind of stick devices somewhere in a cabinet. And I think we saw one retailer that was using basically a safe to store their devices in at night. And the big downside there is just connectivity. So if a device is powered off, first, you're not going to know that it's reporting. Second, it's not going to receive its nightly updates that you have, its security patches, its app updates, and it's just going to break your reporting. So it's going to look like all of a sudden your devices are offline, because they are. And of course, a powered down offline device is much more difficult to locate than one that's up and available. So we always recommend those traditional cradles where users can quickly just dock their device. They don't have to worry about plugging things in. There's nothing really to break. And your EMM, MDM admins are going to love you for that, because they can do their nightly updates, have much higher success rates around that, and not have to worry about trying to time it perfectly during the middle of the workday. So just all in all, a much better practice to use traditional cradles for that.
Yeah, and I think we had one customer I remember that was doing that, where they were taking devices, putting batteries out and taking devices and putting them in a closet, and I think their EMM install rate was less, sub 10% of their nightly installs when they're pushing updates. So I think it's definitely important from an operational standpoint to make sure you have devices in a cradle that are powered on and available to your MDMs. Yeah. Speaking of, I guess, or a little segue into visibility, like what devices are out there, who has it. Can you talk about some of the tools you see around device visibility, or what we've done with companies?
Yeah, sure. So if you're using the BlueFletch tool set, we include our device finder tool that's going to be able to report the last known user, really all the 80, 100 plus data points we get from devices and from usage of those devices can be summarized and put into a device finding tool for you to play notification sounds, to view on a map where a device might be or last seen. So that's extremely helpful with Wi-Fi 6 and some of the latest advancements in RTT and Android 9. We've seen about 1 meter accuracy of device location. So of course, sometimes it can be finding like finding a needle in a haystack, but if you have within a 1 meter area to look for, that haystack becomes pretty small. So that's with BlueFletch. Other tools out there, I think a lot of the OEMs have their own device finding tools. I know one in particular uses a Geiger counter style, which if you're familiar with metal detectors, that the beep, 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 beep as you get closer, hotter, colder kind of concept. And they can leverage similar technologies there for beaconing, for map views. Trying to find that location is definitely important. Not having GPS is not the end of the world with the advancements in Wi-Fi and with battery beacons and some of the smart batteries that, again, Honeywells and Zebras now are rolling out, that even if the device is powered down and the battery is almost drained, it'll turn into just a beacon that consumes minimal power and can at least broadcast that, hey, I'm alive, and allow someone to go try and locate that device. So those are the device finding tools that I've seen. from the OEM and from BlueFletch side. The EMMs also will usually have some type of map view overlay that you can access and try to see where last known location is for a device. So location is probably the biggest and most important thing that we can try to accomplish and understand, that breadcrumb of where a device went and where it might be.
Yeah, I guess one of the notes on that, I know the way we approach it is actually having an on-device tool. So if you're a supervisor or manager in the warehouse, you can see who has what device and where it is. I think the one drawback with EMMs is you don't necessarily want to give your 2,000 managers access to your SODI or AirWatch instance, but it's definitely, if your help desk has access, people can call and look it up that way. Can you also talk about, I guess, with the finding devices to go offline? I know we talked about ZTE, like zero touch enrollment. How does that help with stolen devices?
Right, so zero-touch enrollment is something introduced by Google to facilitate an easier staging and enrollment process to your EMM and MDM. However, one of the kind of side benefits is really around security. So with zero-touch enrollment, you actually associate your device with your EMM in a portal managed by Google. Once that's done, it's basically a forever bond that can't be broken. So even if a device gets stolen and someone decides to take it home and sideload a full reset package, next time they wake up the device, it's going to do its checks with Google to pull down any updates, but hey, it's also going to see that I belong to this EMM and I'm going to kick off registration. So that's basically an infinite loop that no one's going to be able to break out of if they steal a device. So again, we talked about a multifaceted approach to reducing this. This is a really great tool that I don't think enough companies have yet adopted for really just ease of staging and rolling out of devices, but also the big benefit of the security and making devices that get stolen almost worthless to anyone that's looking to do anything other than their intended purpose.
On the note of recoverability, like what are the other approaches for if a device leaves the facility or goes to a client, like or goes to a customer, like what have you seen around recovering those lost devices?
Yeah, so we've built a luggage tag, we call it. So if a device leaves a geofence or a Wi-Fi network, basically lock the device down in a full kiosk that provides return information, almost like your bag tag. If it were to be lost, here's a phone number to call, here's an address. If a device accidentally got delivered to a customer, they might not have any intention of keeping that device or using it. So gives someone a way to actually take action and return a potential device. We talked zero touch enrollment, persistence, which is kind of a technical topic we can touch on, but if a device were to be reset, it can leverage its persistent storage to actually automatically install software such as a tracking tool to broadcast that, hey, I'm back online and here I am, this is my location. So a couple different tools there. We've also built what we call a time bomb, I think was how we labeled it, but if a device goes off of a Wi-Fi network for a certain amount of time, or again leaves an approved area, just basically turn itself and reset itself to wipe any data off of that device that potentially could be stolen or taken off. So businesses might care more about what's on a device versus the actual device themselves, and that's where we built that tool to just go ahead and wipe itself. Prevent anyone from monkeying around in the file system to try to pull anything down. So I think those are the big ones that I can think of for recoverability.
What about just labeling devices or etching devices? I've seen some companies actually etch like company info to the back or have like the metal labels that are fixed to it. How successful is that, would you say, from a recoverability standpoint?
Yeah, I haven't really seen that be extremely successful. I mean, I think that helps with organization and understanding where your devices, should be. For example, numbering devices, you can associate a number on a device to a number on a cradle. Then just quickly looking at that stack of cradles, you can see what devices might be missing. So that definitely helps with sort of the day-to-day management and keeping your workspace tidy. I don't know, I haven't really seen too many successful scenarios of etching or putting phone numbers on and devices being returned back to a store based on that. But again, there's a lot of different scenarios where devices could get lost or missing. So really, as many steps as you can take to make it easy for devices to get back where they're supposed to be is probably worth the experiment.
All right, Patrick, so another question I had for you. Have you seen anybody be successful at having, I call them like LP stickers or tags, like the ones that are on clothing, where if you walk out the store it beeps? Have you seen that where actually people use that and been successful with them with mobile devices?
Yeah, those loss protection tags, no, not really. I think, I don't even know if that would work if it was embedded under a battery. But as we talked about earlier, it's not always an issue of shoplifting, like stealing clothes out of a store. Oftentimes these devices go missing for really innocent reasons. Someone accidentally misplaced it, or if they are going to take it, it might have gone with them out the back door to their car in their backpack. So I don't think we've really seen a big issue of customers coming into a store, finding a device, grabbing it and saying, "Oh, this looks fun," and walking out with it. So I don't know if you've seen anything different in that.
I have not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, "This looks fun."
Yeah.
There's some teenager out there who's definitely that way, though. It's happened. All right, so in closing, just to summarize, losing devices is expensive. I think we talked 10 to 15% is what we see is probably the norm for people that haven't gone through and built out a strategy for reducing device loss. And then I think to Patrick's comment, having a depth strategy, so the accountability, so sort of check in, check out, whether it's through your MDM, whether it's through a tool like BlueFletch, or even a paper-based process. The visibility, so the ability to see who has what device, track devices that are somewhere in the store or a warehouse, depending on your business, and then the recoverability, so things like luggage tag mode, tags in the back of the device using Google ZTE. So those are kind of the key ways from a process standpoint. Anything else to add to that from a device loss and device recoverability standpoint?
I think we covered most of the topics. Just wanted to say that this is not a unique problem to enterprises, to large retailers with thousands, hundreds of thousands of devices deployed. When you have so many remote endpoints, you're bound to lose some here and there. So definitely reach out if you have any issues with this, or if it's becoming a significant problem in your organization. We'd be happy to talk you through what we talked about today and go ahead and even do some proof of concepts around some of the technologies as well. So always happy to help.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for another BlueFletch webinar. Today's webinar is on device loss. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@bluefletch.com. Thank you.